Welcome to Keep the Hotel Empty. Today we've kept the hotel empty for Chaz from Get Cherried. Social, what do you want to call it? Actually, let's just start right there. I don't want to mischaracterize. Would you explain to me a little bit what Get Cherried is, and then I want to press rewind and talk about how you got there.
Yeah, definitely. My name's Chaz. It's actually Cherried. Get Cherried is the social media and website handles. A lot of that's because when I went to buy the domain for Cherried, I couldn't. So I pivoted and just kind of built the website and kind of the branding around the slogan. So
Okay, perfect.
Cherried is a lifestyle brand that's, I like to call it cannabis adjacent, cannabis friendly. I've got over a decade working in the Florida cannabis market. So I created the name actually based off of the slang term for when you spark up a joint or you keep something. So once it's cherried, it stays lit. So Get Cherried, Stay Lit was the tagline around everything, and just building it from there. So cannabis friendly lifestyle, mostly focused on doing some pretty cool events around the Florida area right now.
Yeah, I know you got a big one coming up in March,
Yeah.
and I definitely want to talk about that. But let's press rewind a little bit now and talk to me about what got you personally involved or interested in cannabis in the first place.
For sure. So I actually grew up in Bradenton. My mom was a paramedic, and for most of my upbringing, I definitely was the just say no. Got a lot of like scary stories of people using drugs, cannabis, whatever, and not having good times. Eventually tried it for myself when I was 21. Was going through some things, and I had a noticeable difference in my overall anxiety. I myself was having some kind of anger issues that were starting to build up. So when I tried it the first time, it's like, this isn't nearly as bad as anybody ever said it was. And it also, I started to notice kind of the benefits for it. So I just kind of started, obviously not the best, but self-medicating a little bit with cannabis and kind of learning kind of the nuances of the plant. Fast forward, and at USF, I found a club, Students for Sensible Drug Policy. So I got involved with them, and they were focused not just on cannabis reform, but all drug law reform, and the kind of inherent negativity of the war on drugs and what that's caused just in terms of cultural ramifications.
Right.
So getting more involved with that and kind of understanding a little bit more of the global outlook on drug use and how drug use has always been around and will continue going on, really kind of steered me towards wanting to be more involved in kind of some of those emerging markets. With SSDP, we were actually involved with the initial United for Care campaign in Florida. Was out collecting petitions, getting signatures, had a meet and greet even with John Morgan at the USF campus where they came. So I met him when he was funding that entire first try. Unfortunately, it didn't pass then. They revamped, came back 2 years later. That's when it passed. After it passed, I kind of got involved with organization, the Florida Cannabis Coalition. And we were focused on creating a business network, primarily focused a lot on CBD, but worked with some of the early license holders. Curaleaf, not many people remember, they actually were Moderna Life Sciences when they first got their license. And I still have some graphics from when we had them at one of our events down in Miami. So we're able to work with some of the early license holders, a lot of like hemp-derived companies, CBD companies, and that's where I started kind of learning how to do events. I had absolutely no background in event organization, just kind of started with them as an intern, really enjoyed the industry and wanted to kind of help push things forward a little bit and use my skill set where I could and fit in. So after a couple years, COVID kind of hit and we paused our events. I actually started working in a dispensary as a assistant manager at a VitaCan location, and sidestepped away from Florida Cannabis Coalition and created Cherried right around the time of the pandemic. And that's been kind of a slow build since then.
Well, you brought up an interesting point. When someone goes from what they think they know about something to what they then know from experience, whether or not it's cannabis or a roller coaster, that's kind of one of those moments where you think you know and then you find out. The people that think they know still kind of, they're subjugated to the stigmas and things that you mentioned that you were growing up. This is all too common. In your business, regardless of its avenues, you're always, I feel like you must still be coming up against a lot of those stigmas. What was it like for you when you found out the things that you thought you knew about this were incorrect?
How did I feel?
Yeah. And in turn, how do you help people who have a stigma with it now to invite them into what you are doing?
So it's funny. I initially started changing my thinking before even trying. I was actually at SCF taking a philosophy course. And in that class, we had to argue the legalization of cannabis, actually was the group that I was involved in. And I was on the anti side. And in that kind of looking up scientific literature and things as to why it should be illegal or things like that, I was having issues coming to terms with, I don't agree with any of my arguments on this matter. And when the pro proponents were putting things out, and for whatever reason, I think that was probably the time that it really clicked as to comparing it to alcohol. It just kind of resonated with how many side effects and dangers there are with alcohol as opposed to some of the side effects with cannabis, and they just don't align.
No.
And then long-term ramifications of cannabis use versus alcohol use obviously still need a lot more studies done, because with it being restricted, a lot of studies have been done, I don't want to say in the best light, but they're either done to be favorable, I feel like, or sometimes they're a little bit skewed, as when we were getting all of it made illegal, those were skewed studies as far as the design of the study wasn't going to be conducive to showing a good outcome.
And with relatively small practical sample sets too, yeah?
Exactly. So once you're kind of looking at all of that and realizing, okay, well, we have alcohol that's readily available everywhere. It's promoted pretty much regularly on TV, commercials, pretty
Anywhere.
much any sporting event. And alcoholism is a pretty, it's a disease that does affect a lot of people. I've had family members that it affects. And kind of realizing the health ramifications of long-term alcohol use and looking at what is available with cannabis and realizing this is not nearly as bad.
And at that point, you had no personal experience?
No personal experience.
Okay.
So looking at it like, okay, health-wise, I see no real detriment as to any of the negative stereotyping with it.
At least in a comparative nature.
And a comparative nature to alcohol.
Yeah.
So then once actually trying it, I think I went in, and this is something that unfortunately gets lumped in with the medical industry with cannabis, is people will think of it as this is going to be a cure-all for everything. Well, I've got so much pain, as soon as I take this is going to help. Or for me, once I was finally ready to start, I guess I was kind of not in the best mental space. So it was like, oh, this is going to make me feel happy and laugh.
Right.
And it didn't. And I sat there and I remember asking, like, when am I supposed to feel happy? And it's like, he's like, yeah, it's not going to just do that, but it's going to, I think, as he said, like my friend said, it will dull things and you'll be able to like just kind of feel better. And then after about 30 minutes, like it really started to set. And yeah, I didn't feel as bad or upset for the situation that I was in, but I definitely felt some sort of relief.
Right.
And then that kind of started with, I'll start smoking at night because I had issues falling asleep. So I'd consume and just use it for kind of nighttime. My best friend and I ended up bonding. We started smoking cigars shortly before we both started smoking cannabis. And then we got away from cigars and just kind of bonded over our mutual cannabis use through college.
So the social aspect of it was also something that helped you.
Huge aspect of it, yeah. Knowing people or having friends that are you can look at with high regard that, they're using or consuming, as opposed to the negative connotations of, oh, these people just are lazy, don't do anything. And it's like, okay, so that's another stereotype that's kind of, to me, been washed.
Right.
I personally, I consume daily. I have my business Cherried, and I work for a dispensary as an AGM. So I'm at least 40 hours a week in a brick and mortar location, retail setting, talking to patients, and then finding time outside of that to keep a healthy marriage and build a small business that's, events are kind of an intense work. So
yes,
factor in, I've always been involved with some sort of weightlifting athletics. I played football in high school. After even consuming, I was doing Olympic-style weightlifting just to stay in shape. So to me, some of the stereotypes that I always grew up hearing is clearly like, this isn't right. If you're already kind of a lazier person in mindset, you might be more lazy if you smoke. But if you have interest, desires, things like that, smoking cannabis isn't going to just reduce those.
Right. And to anybody who is a cannabis user or knows people who are, that seems obvious after a while. But on the outside, that one seems like it just can't be true. Why do you think that's such a hurdle to clear? That it's not cannabis that makes you lazy. You might have been lazy to begin with, or it's not anything that makes you unmotivated. You might not have really wanted to do that. Why do you think that one's so hard for people to wrap their head around?
I think, and I'm going to say this with an analogy to not try and skew too far, but I think people like scapegoats, and I think they like easy excuses. So to me, it's easy for, especially in you're trying to make a certain substance demonized or not legitimate, and you say, oh, that's going to make you this, this, and this. So you kind of attach some negative connotations to, oh, you're just going to be lazy and everything like that. I think that inherently doesn't look at what creates kind of like a lazy attitude, which a lot of that, to me, I have a degree in psychology. To me, I think that's a lot of that ties into motivation, and motivation with what needs are already being met. So with some people, laziness is the byproduct of them not necessarily fulfilling all of their interpersonal needs. So they end up kind of deflecting and just taking what they can get almost.
And that's where your Ouroboros comes into play.
Yeah. So, and then with when you have some of those desires and things like that, you absolutely are going to find ways to try and make them work. And sometimes these tools like cannabis can actually help with that. Some people, it gets creative when they consume or smoke. I don't necessarily get creative myself. I think I just notice a lot for relief on the anxiety and just kind of even keel instead of being a little more of an Italian hothead.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's lots of people that can relate to that, I'm sure. Yeah. Okay, I definitely want to get back to the COVID era, but I want to kind of mission drift here just a little bit, because you bring up an interesting point. When people consume cannabis for medical reasons, or what is guised as medical reasons, however you want to look at it, it is to say things like, okay, I'll consume at night to help me sleep, this and that. Then you have people kind of on the other end of the spectrum who can say, I consume because it helps me think more freely or be more creative or whatever the case may be. And that's wouldn't necessarily, I think, in a lot of people's opinions, fall into a medical need. Okay, just in a lot of people's experience, they could be like you and say, it reduced my anxiety enough to help my mind think clear enough to do X, Y, and Z. Okay, where do you draw the line for the advocacy of cannabis consumption, especially in a state like this, where we are in a medical box, but not all cannabis use, I think, by anybody's estimation, really lives in that box? Thank you for sticking with us. We hope you're enjoying the episode. We'd like to take this time to talk to our sponsor for this week, Tony Barrett from Barrett Realty.
Thank you, brother. I really appreciate you having us on the show. Barrett Realty has been in business for 20 years, and we are a boutique real estate company. And I look forward to servicing our community with people that want to buy and sell property. I think it's very important that we're out there advocating for personal property rights. And we want to be the people that you select when it comes to buying and selling homes. So please, if you're interested in buying or selling homes in Manatee, Sarasota, or surrounding counties, reach out to us at Barrett Realty at 941-745-9999 or brmovesyou.com.
Again, we'd like to send a big thanks out to Tony Barrett, Barrett Realty, for sponsoring this episode and being an awesome part of this community. Please enjoy the rest.
So there's two statements. One that kind of like resonated well with me is recreational use can still be medical too. And in that regard is if you're having a hard day and super stressed out, that in of itself, there's enough studies being done on stress and what that does to the body and the body's reactions that if you're legally allowed to go and have a drink of alcohol to alleviate that stress, to me, that is a medicinal use for alcohol. Alcohol was used medically back before Prohibition eras to some extent. So you're kind of looking at it in a similar regard to that, where I'm using this to kind of reduce that stress, and that stress is a medical marker that could create hypertension, lead to cardiac issues, possibly even like not saying like stress by itself is going to lead to a stroke, but when you're stressed and have other ailments,
right,
that is going to kind of help facilitate that. So, and kind of attaching it to that with like what you're saying, not smoking to think clearly isn't inherently a medical use, but maybe the reason you don't think as clearly a lot is you have some nagging pain that you're not super aware of. You have a little bit of social anxiety, as well as I think everybody nowadays has a little bit of ADD with social media and cell phones. So those three things, anxiety, pain, and ADD, are all reasons to, or medically necessary reasons for medical cannabis. So even if it's not for a lay person looking at it saying, oh, you're just doing it to get a clear head, it's to me kind of, well, they might have a little bit of attention deficit that is being treated with that. So kind of marking it in within medical there. For me, with the events, I do my events and I make sure that they're cannabis friendly, and I have an area for patients to go and consume. And a lot of that's done by me reading the letter of the law with Florida, which a private venue can allow a patient to consume their medication as long as it's not within view of the general public, and as long as it's not around the rest of the public. So, for instance, the event that I have coming up in March is a music fest, beer fest, hoping to bring a lot of people together. People that have medical cards will be able to check in and go off to a private area to be able to consume their medication in private. That's not to say you're allowed to share, because that's illegal.
Right.
And that's notated in the rules for the event and things like that. And for me, I don't check IDs. I have a licensed physician that'll come out and check. So again, nothing with relating to HIPAA on the side of Cherried. partnered with a doctor to kind of take on that role to make sure that we don't have anybody misrepresenting or getting in with an expired ID. But for me, the benefit of that is it's helping to normalize that there are, in the state of Florida, I want to say, and I haven't looked at the recent numbers, but over 400,000 patients, I feel like, 400,000 patients at least.
Yeah.
And that's a good amount of people, and that's not factoring in people that are still regularly going to hemp-derived CBD shops and things like that and buying the legal weed you don't need a card for. So to me, I think there's a big market for legitimizing and normalizing cannabis use in the same regard as alcohol. With it being medical, I could be the first to agree that Florida's dispensaries operate as more of a medical recreational.
Right.
And a lot of their appeal, their look, the products that we sell out of the dispensaries is predominantly flower, vapes, and edibles, which are all leading sales in legal states as well. Usually, flower is always going to be king, and yeah, you can make some arguments that smoking is not a healthy thing. I will never agree that inhaling anything into your lungs is inherently healthy.
Yeah, I think one doctor said, I can advocate for lots of things, but up to the point where inhaling combusted plant matter, I can't, no matter what we're doing.
Yeah, and I won't be the first. I can't defend that as being a medical process.
Right.
But I do know specifically there was a patient named Kathy Jordan who, for her, combusting and smoking and the elements of the cannabis plant and that process actually helps with the lungs and creating more of I think they call it a bronchodilator.
Yeah.
And that was able to help her clear her lungs from fluid buildup because she had ALS. So as much as I agree it's carcinogenic plant material going into your lungs, vaping is an entirely other thing. I did a talk where somebody asked me about vapes, and it's like, I continue to vape and smoke, but I don't think it's healthy. I won't advocate saying like, yeah, inhaling anything is going to be good for your lungs. Your lungs aren't really designed to do that, but
your liver wasn't really designed to take an alcohol either. I mean, that's our pancreas wasn't really meant to have ass tons of sugar, and you know what I mean. We're already that ship done sailed.
We're already here. So if you find relief for other things, and that is going to be the quickest or the way for it, that's a decision that you as an adult get to make.
Okay, so then that leads me to this question. So correct me if I'm wrong in this, or reshape me if I'm off on this, but your stance on it should be akin to alcohol, where we just lift the floodgate and let everybody figure out how it works for them best. We're already doing that with a more dangerous substance? For
the most part, yeah. I was involved with Regulate Florida, and that was the kind of viewpoint with that was regulate it like alcohol. I think you can still have a medical market within that, especially for individuals that are dealing with more serious ailments like cancer,
right,
and things where they're getting chemo. So now you're looking at capsules, tinctures, and a lot more of those medical designed products. But I mean, Florida, we got so close to passing at 60% that I think a lot of the patients and adults in Florida see it for what it is and wanting it more of a recreational market that's not by the guise of a medical market. And like I said, I think the dispensaries have already been kind of positioned as we're medical because we have to be, but
right.
A lot of our product focus is definitely on more of the recreationally used products.
Yeah, and it is a little bit of a hide the ball game. Sure. So, well, we initially were going to have you on before the vote in November, but it didn't work out till you get here now. All good. But now we're on the other side of it, and you mentioned it didn't pass. We got very close, but it didn't pass. What do you think? I guess if you can, crystal ball for me a little bit.
Crystal ball, like what happened or what's the future?
Both.
Both. So what happened... I'm going to use a sports analogy for this one. The Chiefs are back in the Super Bowl, and right now it's their third straight, and a lot of football fans I know hate the Chiefs.
Yeah.
I think it's popular, and growing up, the Patriots, same thing. Won a lot, people hated that team. Even younger Yankees had as many World Series titles, and they were like a vilified team.
Facts.
So we look at Florida Cannabis, and the company that spearheaded the initiative for the ballot in November was Trulieve. They were one of the first to market, and I won't be one to downplay some of the negative things that have been attached to corporate cannabis or some of the companies involved. I think there's issues with just corporations in general, especially in a cannabis marketplace.
Burgeoning industries.
It's going to happen. But Trulieve, for all intents and purposes, was the first to market and the first to open as many locations as they have, and they got a massive market share just off the top. To me, that puts them as essentially the early days, like the Chiefs are right now, the Pats. They're winning, in a sense, in the market. So they have the biggest target on their back for haters to kind of come out or criticize everything that they're doing. Florida is a vertically integrated state. That was done by our state legislation when they passed the law. So the law got voted on by the public, and then Florida legislation meets and they put the framework around the law. A lot of people sit there and say, oh, these license holders sent in lobbyists to restrict it or make it where it was vertically integrated.
Right.
Whether that's the case or not, the state had the ability to make it a horizontal market, and they did not. So the state created the vertical monopoly that we see. As the petition came out and as support seemed like it was going, our governor used, and this is why I'm not the biggest fan of the methods, used state taxpayer money to put out kind of combative arguments that I think helped facilitate already the hemp side argument of this is a monopoly, and if we pass this law, it's just giving control to the monopoly. I think one of the commercials that I saw a lot in Florida was like the prototypical monopoly guy and talking about like how this is really good for him. And that specifically bothered me because, like I said, the legislation created the monopoly to begin with. So we're just being told this misleading story about what's going to happen with this law, which it doesn't actually have the wording. The wording that people, I think, used to kind of attach that to a monopoly was if this vote passes, which it got close to the 60%. So if it had gotten 61%, and if Florida tried to drag their feet like they did with the medical market, then it had wording in it that would just allow the dispensaries to start selling recreationally.
Oh.
So I think that was something that a lot of people looked at as like, look, they're trying to create a monopoly. I can tell you from like working with Trulieve back in the day, Kim Rivers would be the first one to tell you that they would sell clones if they were allowed to. If we had home grow, which is another sticking point for activists, is no home grow, vote no. It's like growing at home is hard. You're still going to need to buy when you're growing anyway. Like I don't grow myself. I've grown tomatoes, and I can tell you as soon as I had a pest issue, it wiped out most of my crop.
Yeah, that was such a strange thing to me. It's like you can't grow tobacco. You can't distill alcohol beyond belief. You can't even brew an amount of beer that you could then sell.
Yeah.
Like that was really strange to me just on the outside looking in. It was like, why get stuck on that? You already can't do that with anything else.
Yeah.
That's pretty much standard. This is America. We protect capitalism first.
Mm-hmm. And exactly that. But in that same point with capitalism is if Trulieve in these dispensaries, if you're allowed to grow at home, why do you think they wouldn't sell you seeds and clones?
Right.
Obviously, they want you to come in and buy their goods, but if they have a really good plant and they can start creating clones to sell those clones too, like why would they not do that? So the idea that they would want to stop it so that they just keep you buying from the dispensary is like, nah, I don't buy that at all. personally. Like it's just I think that's a short-sighted look because, like you said, corporations, capitalism, you're going to find ways to maximize your revenue.
Right.
So if that's another avenue that I can sell out of the dispensary, I'm definitely going to do it. And I know they were looking at that at the time too. So I think that definitely with the no home grow, it has a nice ring to it, and a lot of people get tied up in that. I think the misinformation about the monopoly really kind of helped as well, because you have small businesses feeling like, oh, we're going to get pushed out.
Well, as someone who operates a small business that's cannabis adjacent, what do you think the effects were that it didn't happen? I mean, obviously you're able to keep what you had going, but what more were you looking to be able to do in a recreational world? Because even in states where recreational is allowed, it's not like there's a joint buffet at the concert.
Right.
You know what I mean? So what's the transition between where you are and ultimately where pie in the sky is?
So, if we had passed recreational, I already had some plans in place. I do a monthly kayak outing already with a brand Urban Flow and Naughty Kayak up in St. Pete. If it had passed recreationally, I was already talking to Star Trolley and a couple of the dispensaries around St. Pete to do a dispensary tour and then end up at either a brewery or potentially Ferg's for Ferg's has a renovated upstairs. So I was already in the process of planning out just like a little touristy kind of tour with trolley and multiple dispensary stops. Obviously, it would be difficult if there's no public consumption. New York, you can smoke cannabis anywhere. You can smoke a cigarette. Chicago does not have that rule. So Chicago, it's still illegal to consume publicly. That's a hard rule to enforce.
I was going to say.
So it's not like I've been in Chicago. I smoked a joint on the street. Like that's still going to happen. With Florida, obviously, there was a lot of talk about public consumption and writing in laws or places where that would be not allowed, which is why with that tour, it's like, okay, if there's a business that's going to allow us to kind of hang out afterwards, you can hit the dispensary shop, and now here's a fun outing afterwards.
Right.
That kind of event for me only really works in a rec market. Medical market is a little bit harder. I can put that plan together, but it's harder to appeal to individuals that have their medical card only, which is why the bigger events are designed not to be cannabis only, but just cannabis friendly. So you don't have to have a medical card to come to my golf tournament, the Halloween party, or any of the other things that I do regularly. It's designed to be welcoming and then give you kind of an introduction in a safe environment sort of way.
So explain to me I don't want to mischaracterize it as gray area, but explain to me the area that your events fall into, because it seems like a pretty damn good happy medium.
Yeah, I don't think it's a gray area at all because, like I said, reading the layout and the letter of the law, all of the events that I do are at private property where I get the owner's consent to allow patients to use. And then,
why doesn't that simplicity of that framework proliferate more?
I don't have an answer for that one. I think because
that seems pretty easy.
It is.
I mean, to some degree. Until you have to do the backwork. The framework seems easy. I'm not trying to downplay the...
I think you have to have venues that are going to be friendly in mind for it. There's some bars or restaurants that I've reached out to that do get worried about like agriculture, looking at, oh, you have a hemp brand here and you're selling alcohol. So I think there's some worries with that, and I think a lot of it is some businesses maybe don't want to take that step out of what they're already doing with what's working. So I think it's a matter of businesses just kind of understanding that kind of legality, that they do have the ability to, again, being medical, you can't you as a business, you can't necessarily stop somebody from using their EpiPen if they needed to, because it's a medical device and it's a medical need. So it's kind of using that framework where, hey, this person has anxiety and we have this event going on that's got loud music and a lot of people. Yeah, we're okay having an area that if they need to get away to, take a quick puff off of their vape, we're okay with that. I think music venues would benefit well from doing stuff like that and kind of coming around on that. But I think it's a mixture of like alcohol liquor licenses and just not wanting to stir the pot too much, as far as why it's not as prolific as I would like to see.
So you think that that's more, again, that the stigma still exists in such a way that if someone were to be more friendly to what you're doing in a more open way, there would be some retaliatory thing coming their way?
Not so much retaliatory, but it might just maybe make them feel like they're alienating some of their normal clientele or something. So that's just my speculation on it.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, at this point, we're all kind of, it's a little Wild Westy.
It is. I definitely know there's some organizations that do pretty big events that are a little bit more, I would say, gray market centered and deal a lot more with some hemp brands and things like that may or may not be licensed. And they do well. It's a good market. For me, that's not the direction I've wanted to go in, because I recognize the risks with that. Up even last year, Florida was trying to ban a lot of those hemp companies and brands. So I have a handful. They were going to try and cap the hemp-derived THC market, eliminate like the THCA.
Yeah.
And like all of that. And I have 2 brand partners that would have been affected by that directly.
Talk to me a little bit about that, the hemp-derived THC, the THCA thing, because in a medical state, we have the dispensaries here that, they're all what everybody expects. But then we also have places here, smoke shops, hole-in-the-wall wellness shops, whatever, that are selling THCA. Let me in a little bit about what the score is with this portion of the show.
So THCA is definitely not, I'll be the first to say, I don't stay on top of everything on that side of the market myself.
Is there a reason for that?
I don't really use the THCA flower from the smoke shops. I
mean, how do you see it affecting the market? Like, how does that come into play?
A lot of them are using the hemp farm law that went into effect, I want to say, in 2018. And from my understanding, at a federal level, they were looking at closing some of those loopholes that they've been using to get the Delta 8, Delta 9s. Basically, and this is my kind of rudimentary understanding of all of that, Delta 8, Delta 9, they create with a chemical process from CBD. So with some of like the vapes and things like that, they're creating a process to make it convert to the Delta 8, Delta 9, so that it's still a hemp-derived product, but they've done something to make it where it's more psychoactive. With THCA, what they were doing with that loophole is that is scientifically the marker that all cannabis has before it converts to THC or Delta 9 THC. So as soon as heat's applied, then it converts it to THC. So the way that that's being used is it's the same flower you're getting at a Florida dispensary, because they're testing THCA in their test results, and we have THC up to these levels out of this smoke shop. That's been allowed, and again, this isn't like any official source, but one of my partners being Chillum, one of the employees there was mentioning, like, yeah, they're not really making THCA illegal, but what they have started to do or may start to do is go around to these shops, test them. If they come out where they're testing hot, they'll confiscate, and then they'll do a $5,000 charge on the THCA flower. So you're getting fined for selling the THCA flower, but they're not shutting you down or they're not pulling licenses. They're just giving you a fine, which the fine is substantial enough that most of those shops won't continue necessarily doing it.
Right.
With the other area, and there's always going to be bad actors, and everything is, I feel like there's enough people in the Delta 8 market that can either falsify testing results or kind of manipulate things to put product out. And then you have the gas station hemp-derived products, which are probably not really tested very well at all, so you don't know for sure what's in there. Couple that with some of those places will show up at Music Fest and just give out samples, which the state of Florida doesn't want done just in general. And you have people that are eating 10, 15 milligrams of Delta 8, Delta 9, which is still a psychoactive effect. And that, I think, actually just happened at a festival in St. Pete where it was a 420 shop got, like, they were out giving out samples, and that put, like, a negative flag on some of the other brands that were there too. So, I think that's why I stay away from that side of the market myself, is for all of the good licensed ones that are trying to do it by what the state rules and things like that are. I think you have other actors that'll kind of come in, see an ability to make a quick dollar, and don't really care what's in the product that they're selling.
Yeah, well, and that's exactly it. And we talked to another gentleman who was involved in the cannabis industry here about this, and I'm curious what your thoughts are. One of the stigmas that surrounds cannabis consumption, especially now, is that the testing isn't really regulated. The testing is regulated by the people who are doing it. How do you kind of square the circle for people that the product that they're using or whatever is, any of this can be trusted, that it's not all just shoot in the dark if the real only answer is to just lift the gate and let everybody find out?
I think for sure. I think especially in other states, you've started to see that the testing can be bribed and kind of misleading, even in legal dispensaries and legal markets. For Florida, I know that the dispensaries will shop around to the different labs to try and get more favorable testing. I have my own theories on what labs will do to try and increase those testing numbers for the dispensaries. As I'm getting older, realize that a lot of the systems that are designed to be in place to kind of increase public trust, to some extent, you almost have to put some faith into it to allow them to work. So by that, I mean, Florida does require the testing labs to be licensed with the state of Florida, and the DOH, for all purposes, is pretty active in trying to find wrongdoers in the industry. So to me, for sure, these dispensaries can be shopping around to the different labs. I'm going to kind of put my trust in them a little bit more because they have, unfortunately, a lot of money tied into licenses, and those licenses can be affected if they are sidestepping or breaking laws that they can be found on. With the hemp side of things, I don't think they have as much scrutiny in terms of what they're doing for testing. And if they're not licensed, they're not a hemp licensed brand by the state, and they're just now telling you, well, this is my testing result, that automatically is a little bit more questionable for me than, obviously, yeah, big business. They can falsify reports. Working in two of them, I know what they have to do for the testing procedure, so I think it's a little bit more difficult for them to falsify or change things. I do think you can make some arguments on the legitimacy of some labs for sure.
Right.
But again,
but this is, again, the bad actors, no matter what the case.
And that's where it's, yeah, you don't tear down the entire system because bad actors on both sides. You work on finding ways to get rid of the bad actors. And that's kind of my overall philosophy on it is I'm going to trust kind of the system in place and utilize my voice and processes to try and point out bad actors within that system and not delegitimize the whole system as a whole to open the floodgates and let everybody do whatever. And now we don't know who or what to trust with test results or anything like that.
Yeah, right. I think a lot of people get that fear or get that image in their head. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Okay, so take me back then now, since we've kind of mission drift a bunch, but we're allowed. Take me back to coming out of COVID or COVID times when you're thinking about how you're going to utilize the system that's in play and the things that you've realized after going over the law and what you're thinking you're going to do at that point.
So when I started Cherried, I actually just planned on I'll sell T-shirts and maybe just make it like a merch brand.
Ah.
And then I don't remember exactly what it was. A couple of things happened, and then I decided that no, I can do events. And the first event I decided to do was a Halloween party. My birthday's in October. My wife's birthday's October. We eloped in October.
Nice.
So we always used like October as kind of our fun month, and I've always just had an affinity for Halloween as like a holiday just in general.
Yeah.
And driving in St. Pete, I worked downtown St. Pete, and driving by there's a building called Nova 535, and it stood out to me. It was like, that looks like a cool spot. Saw like the courtyard, looked it up online, saw it was an event venue, and decided that's where I'm gonna do my first event. And for having a degree, somewhat of a business background, I can tell you that starting a company with no capital and choosing an event venue that charges about 10 grand for an event was probably short-sighted and created a lot more difficulty, I think, for me than I probably needed to in starting with events.
But the vision was there.
The vision was there. I did it. It was the first Halloween party. I called it Edgy Halloween because we were on the edge of the Edge district of downtown.
Nice.
Had maybe 150 people show up. Was hoping to get 300. But the bones were there for kind of what I wanted to see.
And you did this out of the gate with cannabis adjacent?
Mm-hmm. So that was the big part with Nova is they are literally like off of MLK downtown St. Pete. They have a brick courtyard with a private gate, so they have all the staffing. So for everything that I wanted to do as far as a trial and fitting in the mold of what I was doing, they were okay with patients consuming. They had an upstairs balcony that we could restrict, and then I took spider webbing to put over it so you couldn't actually see who was up there. So made it a private area, and then a doorman at that door where we did the wristbands. So that was the first patient area that I did. Had a dance floor and had a couple of bars. So I was able to have a cannabis friendly with a Halloween party with a bar element tied in as well.
And you advertised it as such?
Mm-hmm.
Was there any part of you that's thinking, oh man, I hope they don't try to shut this shit down on me in real time?
Oh, for sure. Definitely was worried, like, oh, am I going to have surprise visits? Definitely was worried, like, or am I going to have police show up? Like, different elements to that. But again, I felt confident with what I've read in the law, consulting with some lawyers as well. Like, I felt overall like, okay, these are the checks that are in place, and my overall liability it should be pretty negligible. So yeah, it went well. Definitely would have liked more people for the first year, but it definitely put the ball in motion for, okay, I can do this, and I can do this with myself as a relatively small team. My wife and I pretty much did everything and had a couple volunteers help with the door.
Nice.
So just kind of started building from there. Added some more events the next year. That's when I introduced the event at Ferg's, which is Brews, Bands, and Buds. Partnered with SPCA Tampa Bay for like a pet tie-in. But really the buds for that branding is cannabis. You got breweries, you've got bands, and you've got buds. Did a golf tournament that year as well, which started the For the Vets golf tournament that I do at Mainlands up in Pinellas Park. And then continued the Halloween party. I just rebranded that to the Devil's Ball, and kind of cleaned up some things for year two, increased the attendance. So we had about 200 for year two, and really had a lot more momentum going from there. And did a holiday party that year as well for year two. Holiday party, that one's difficult. Holiday times for events are always hard to get people out, especially in between like Christmas and New Year's and things like that.
Right.
It was a lot of fun to do, but I tried this past year moving that event out to Las Vegas, tied around the MJ BizCon, and partnered with a charity organization, the Crohn's Foundation, that I do some stuff with.
Very cool.
Unfortunately, mother-in-law passed away just before Thanksgiving, so I was not able to get out, and that event still went on, but wasn't. I think it went well, but I don't have enough experience being there to know what could be cleaned up and what worked and what didn't. So, kind of trying to figure out what I want to do this year with that holiday slot, and try again out in Vegas or bring it back here to Tampa, St. Pete area. But the other three staple events are kind of set up, and then Cherried evolved a little bit from there to bring in some of the membership elements. So I have a membership program for individuals where they can pay either an annual fee or a monthly fee. And then I send them a membership card, which works as a discount card to some business partners, coffee shops, Fergs, restaurants, things like that. Mostly around St. Pete right now, but working on adding more businesses to that lineup to expand that. Last year I had Goldflower as a dispensary partner, and I have a couple of doctors that'll do discounts for first-time cards and card renewals. So trying to build the membership element out to be like the AAA card for cannabis.
So do you see that as ultimately the biggest get to where your business can go? Is that the biggest growth portion?
I think so, yeah. I look at it in a sense of the more partners that I'm able to bring on with that, which is the goal this year, especially trying to get a couple more dispensaries that see the overall outlook with it, but want to be involved. And for me, it's a way to kind of help market some of those brands and partners without them having to market themselves. I have a decent little email list and social gathering that's kind of been building. Again, focused on Tampa, St. Pete right now, but a lot of those concepts can be used elsewhere in other cities and things like that.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question. So is the idea to be able to take this framework and do it on like a Tampa, St. Pete size area, and just be able to do it anywhere around the country and always have it be like these kind of local Cherried chapters, as it were?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Chapterizing and everything is something that I've been looking at expanding in the future, especially because we, with Florida Cannabis Coalition, we would do networking events all over the state. Mm-hmm. And there's community involvement all over. I myself don't like driving all over the state, so I did that already for a couple of years. I don't want to do that again. So yeah, having potential partners that are, involved in the brand and the mission, that maybe they want to do an event if they're located in Orlando, being able to kind of help facilitate that with helping with some of my back-end marketing and providing like the ticketing space. But they can utilize it for like an ability to promote their business even more, especially at the local level kind of thing, so that I don't have to be there for the event to go well. And like you said, it's just creating that community elsewhere, and eventually not just in Florida, but in other states, especially in more recreational states.
Yeah, I guess that's sort of the framework of building a community around it, regardless of what we're doing.
Mm-hmm.
So you said the word mission. If you could maybe, I know we're dancing around it here, maybe kind of couch for me a little bit what you see the mission of Cherried is. Is it more to bring awareness and to drop the stigma, or more to create the community, or somewhere in a cacophony of those?
Probably a mix of both. Dropping the stigma, but creating that sense of community. Being involved, like, anytime you watch an industry that's kind of going from black market to legal market, it's wild, because there's definitely cultural elements from it being in the black market that don't always translate to mainstream or the legal market. And I think that's part of why I want to kind of tap into that sense of community around it. Is obviously with the black market, they had their stronger sense of community and kind of building something that's not recognized. With the legal side, some people that are newer maybe are looking for kind of a sense of community themselves within like their interests and likes and things. So being able to create that while also kind of paying homage to some of the black market side of things and real cannabis culture is kind of the overall goal. And a lot of that stems to, like we talked about earlier, where consumption around friends or being able to do these things with friends or some sort of community just kind of helps overall. And I think that helps destigmatize the use as well. So the more people involved, the bigger the community, then inherently the stigma kind of drops a little bit while normalizing it more.
Absolutely. So now that you've been able to do more than a couple of these events, and you've branched out a bit, what are some of the things that you were surprised to learn from these events? When you started seeing people come together and consume in a place and consume together, was there any of this that was like, oh man, I didn't expect that?
Honestly, not really. It's from being on like kind of the trade show, building like those kind of events. Like I saw that a lot of people want to come out for stuff, especially if they're interested in it. I think what really like drove me to do something a little different with Cherried was with the Cannabis Coalition. A lot of our stuff was geared towards education. So we'd have speakers, or we'd have like speaking sessions and things like that. And that's something that I've gotten away from a lot with the Cherried events kind of thing. And a lot of that is because I think, to me, that was something that I learned from those events back then, was I don't think a lot of people necessarily care about coming to get educated. I think a lot of people are just looking for outlets to have fun and be able to bond with people that way.
Certainly, that's an easier sell.
So,
hey, you want to have fun or bond? Yeah. Hey, you want to get educated? Maybe.
Yeah. And on top of that, it's doing those educations. It's okay. Now I have to have a speaker, and what is the speaker going to be talking about? Do I agree with it? Is that the messaging that I want attached to my branding? Is that
right?
So there's a lot of things to me that kind of come into that, and a lot more of a complexity on creating an event around it. Whereas, yeah, I think a lot of it, especially having those expo halls and realizing that people came out honestly for free shit and to just kind of consume sometimes. So it's like, why not give them that ability and then just build a party or an event around it? So
you're right.
That's kind of the goal. I think the most surprising for me, being kind of a back-end analytics, is I'll run social media ads for each event, and seeing the demographic shift for the golf tournament, Brewfest to Halloween, or the holistic industry nights that I used to do, is like you could pretty much draw a line and be like, yep, this event is going to be a lot more 30 to 50-year-old men. This event is going to speak a lot more to 30 to 50-year-old women. And like seeing that split was, I don't want to say it was surprising, but it was surprising on like how defined this split is with some of the marketing and promotions that I do.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy. That's why I asked that question. It's weird to see some of the weird things that get revealed once you actually start paying attention to it. Mm-hmm. So, how do you navigate the promotion of your events? Because you have to be kind of careful that it doesn't just seem like, hey, this is just some stoner free-for-all event. You're obviously trying to be more, for want of a better way of putting it, highbrow than that scene. I know that promoting events can be a ton of work. It has to be even more work when you have got that little line to walk. How do you handle promoting your events?
So strategic partnerships sometimes with like news outlets. I've worked some, especially with the Brews event with I Love the Berg, to kind of help get more interest just around the St. Pete area. For me, it's wording. I usually kind of include the cannabis tie-in as like a boilerplate or in the middle of a paragraph. So when talking about the descriptions, for instance, with Brews, Bands, and Buds, MMJ friendly is probably the third one down as far as any graphics go, and it's not the main mention. The biggest mention is the brewery sampling and come out and help us pick the winning brewery. Have the band lineup, vendor market, and MMJ patients can access a private area upstairs. So it's a lot of it's almost like using that part as like a footnote for the event, and like here's the rest of the cool stuff that's going on. Also, if you have a card, you can use.
Is that something you would do if you didn't have to?
Probably still, yeah.
And is that because the philosophy of whoever needs to find that footnote will?
A little bit that, and a little bit because I've been to cannabis-centric focused events, and it does bring out a different kind of clientele. And that kind of clientele can sometimes scare off other people that may be interested but don't want to be at a stoner event.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was wondering.
Yeah. So it's a lot of, like you said, tiptoeing around that's not to take away from those stoner events. There's great people that
Oh yeah, of course. It's just more the world's
exactly.
you know.
And for me in the branding and positioning, it's like I want those people that are definitely interested in using or already using, but don't want to go to a cannabis-centric event. They just want to go out and have fun and feel safe being able to use what they have. Right.
Yeah, that's a big issue, the safety issue. Mm. I think your events do a really good job. I have not attended one, but from what I've been able to read and gather, it seems like your consciousness of that is not lost on people. So that's really cool.
Definitely.
Well, I want to get you out of here on something fun, something a little freewheel you can color outside the lines. Since you do have a background and a good understanding of the legislation and the framework behind where we're at right now, and you do have some good visions and ideas of where you'd like to be able to go in the future, if you had the magic pen, without having to go into legalese or put you on a spot for a whole paragraph worth, how would you frame this so recreational could come forth in a responsible way and events like yours could flower in a less stigmatized way? No pun intended with the flower.
I personally would like to see a horizontal market.
And by that you mean?
Able to get a license for growing and cultivation or retail or transportation. Basically, they would initiate more licensing for different parts within the business.
And that would just allow like third-party trucking companies, third-party whatever, instead of all being owned
exactly.
Gotcha.
So with that, that would definitely open up the market more. But with that, some states have gone further and created consumption lounges or places for actual consumption. I would like to see that in our market, but for me, it's I can still find a way to make a Cherried event work in any kind of like framework. So these are all just personal wishes for my
of course.
my own wishes.
Yeah,
for,
yeah,
like,
you're off the chain on the fun question.
What I want to see the market. I want to see more horizontal. I like the concept of home grow, but that's not a make or break for me.
And there isn't a terrible ton of money in that market for anyone.
Yeah. So it's like, yeah, let's do a little more horizontal. Let's have consumption designated places, like some places are creating in Chicago, California, Las Vegas, and then I think those are the main two things that I care about mostly. I also I take that back. People that are still in prison and convicts that are tied with drug charges. I think there's only one state that legalized and then went in and cleaned up records. I would like to see that in Florida, but I won't hold my breath on that one.
Yeah. Yeah, we might be a ways from that one. Well, Chaz, I can't thank you for coming down enough, man, and sharing some time and all your insight with us. Very valuable. I definitely want to get out and see one of your events, and we'll make sure we got a link in it, and we'll get this one out before your event in March, and hope that goes awesome for you, brother. I appreciate it very much, man.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, man.